What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. It is Thursday night. That means it is time for Lettermen Live, presented by Wendy's. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but Andy, have you had them covered in sauce? Because Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them all the way up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker like Andy Backstrom on the other side of that screen, try the spicy ghost pepper. Only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. Because for a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's. A participating U.S. Wendy's. Andy, getting a little R&R on this off week. Not having a game to cover this weekend. Not having to head to the Horseshoe on Saturday. It's going to feel a little weird considering it's only week 3 and the slate around the country isn't that great, but we're here to talk about some Ohio State football. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it feels weird to have an off week. They're calling it the improvement week at Ohio State because they haven't played enough games for them to really have a bye week. So again, it's more about each position group improving, and yeah, it's time for us to check what we've done with our work the first 2 weeks and try to get better as well.
Yeah, we're going to keep improving. We've gotten on the film. Tim May, the 41-year vet, he's really harping on film study. We got to get in there. Make sure that we've got everything buttoned up. We've got to improve every day. We feel like we've done a really good job the first couple weeks of the season, but there's always room for improvement, as Coach Knowles likes to say. 108 to 6 isn't good enough. So we got to keep building on that. Try to create some turnovers, even at Lettermen Row. So it is weird. I will agree. Like, I like getting in the flow of the season. I don't know if I would consider myself a routine guy. You might consider yourself one, but like, the season, you do get into a little bit of a routine, just like the players do. And to be off this week feels a little wrong, if I'm being honest. Like, Ohio State had 2 off weeks back in 2019, but those were in October and November, and they felt a little bit more earned than this one does.
Certainly, with the first 2 games being against MAC opponents, like, you don't have last year's season opener at Indiana or the year before, opening the season against Notre Dame with a high-profile game. You had games against Akron and then Western Michigan. And as you mentioned, Ohio State outscored those teams 108 to 6. So games haven't been close. But then again, you know what? Maybe Ohio State did earn a little bit of a break, considering that you see like Notre Dame losing to a MAC opponent in Northern Illinois. You see Penn State almost losing to a MAC opponent in Bowling Green, winning 34 to 27. And so teams across the country haven't necessarily handled business like Ohio State has. So it's not that it's something to celebrate, but so far it's a team that everyone expected. And I think that is at least the green light you're looking for as an Ohio State fan going into this off week, going into the game against Marshall.
Yeah, we talked about Marshall a little bit last week because the only reason that we talked about that is because Marshall is also off this week, which I hate. Like, couldn't the scheduling powers that be just get together and say, like, hey, what are we doing? Let's play this on the 14th, and we'll both get the 21st off. The other scheduling quirk that's interesting for Marshall is the week after Marshall plays Ohio State, the Thundering Herd, they play in Huntington at home, and they host Western Michigan. So there'll be a common opponent, between Western Michigan and Marshall directly after Ohio State. I think that is just really interesting. But for real, Ross Bjork, whoever the AD is at Marshall, come on, we could have played this thing on the 14th and gotten it done, and then had the 21st off when I think the slate around the country is a little better than it is this upcoming weekend. Because, like, one of the things I love doing, Andy, is we get the full schedule. We'll probably get the Ohio State 2025 schedule in like November. And the first thing I do after I book my hotels for the road trips is look at the bye weeks and say, like, okay, what do I get to watch when Ohio State's not playing? I know Ohio State fans do that too. And to look at September 14th and see, it's just not good. We're going to talk about that later, though. But it's just not good.
Well, you know what? For as much as this Ohio State roster looks like an NFL roster with all the talent, the guys that will go to the combine and then the draft, maybe this is the NFL mold, right? You've got 2 games. That's your preseason. Then you have the off week. Maybe the Marshall game's the season opener in the NFL sense, and you're against one of the league bottom dwellers, and you have that game, and then you step into a divisional game. And, for Ohio State, that's playing in the Big Ten, going to East Lansing and playing Michigan State. So maybe we can look at it that way.
Sure.
It's a 12-team playoff. That's more like the NFL playoffs. So let's frame it that way. This was the preseason. The preseason's over. Now you're going into the regular season.
I love it. I love it. Look at the optimist over there, the eternal optimist, Andy Backstrom, on the other side of your screen, ladies and gentlemen. I love that. I think that's really cool. It's not every day that you get to say that you're playing the New York Giants to open the season, but I guess that's what we'll call Ohio State Marshall. I was going to say the Jets, but we have Alex Gleitman working with us, and I think he would be mad at me if I called the Jets one of the bottom dwellers of the NFL. So anyway, we're going to do some superlatives here. We're going to get into a few things that we've seen from Ohio State that we like. Maybe a couple things that we still have a couple questions on. Maybe not. I don't know. We've talked a lot about what we still want to see from this team. It's only been 2 games. The sample size is really small. We'll do superlatives. We've got some we're going to talk about Buckeyes around the country who have transferred out, who are going to be playing this weekend and are just playing well in general, because Ryan Day talked about that a little bit. Then we'll get into the slate from around the country at the end of the show. So we got some good stuff for you guys. Even on an off week, I hope that this show is pretty informative on Ohio State, but also players who are playing elsewhere. You might think to yourself, man, that guy transferred. Where did he go? And we're here to tell you where they went. So we'll talk about that. Before we get there, Andy, though, I want your biggest surprise about this Ohio State football team so far. I'm not surprised about a lot of things. I am surprised about a few things. Maybe we'll do a little bit of a draft like we always do. We say we're only going to pick one, then we end up picking 2 and go around the room. So number 1, I guess your first pick. What are you most surprised by from this Ohio State team so far?
Maybe just how eager Brandon Inniss is to return a punt for a touchdown, because like the first game he returned punts for 60 total yards. I think it was 4 punts he actually returned. In the second game, it just felt like he wanted to break one loose but didn't have room to do so, and almost taking a few risks here and there to try to return a punt. I think the special teams unit in general, not to say I'm surprised because it was such an emphasis in the offseason to be different, but it definitely does feel different with the exception of some hiccups and kickoff return. And, we've talked earlier this week about Jaden Ballard and potentially a change being there, kickoff return. But aside from kickoff issues, I feel like the rest of the special teams has been new and improved. And I think Brandon Inniss has been a big part of that. The kind of role he's embraced with being that punt returner and the energy he's bringing to special teams, along with that whole group of coaches with Rob Keyes, Gunnar Daniel, and all the assistant coaches helping out, with Ryan Day being the umbrella figure of watching over all of that. I think Brandon Inniss has been like a big kind of like energizer bunny for that group. And again, it's not super surprising. I don't know if anything this season has been super surprising so far because, again, they are who we thought they would be at this point. But I will say just how eager he is to return one back to the house. It is fun to watch. At times, it's also like a little worrisome because you don't want him to take too many risks. And I felt like there were a few against Western Michigan where it's like, you probably should have called for a fair catch, but that's been interesting to see for sure.
So now we got an NFL reference. I've already invoked the Giants, and then you invoked the late Denny Green with they are who we thought they were. I like this. And you got the Cardinals behind you too. So there we go. This is an NFL show now, I guess. I like that. It is surprising with how much Brandon Inniss wants to do that. But I think it's also really cool that Brandon has, he could be one of the lead receivers on this team right now. And he probably should be. But something happened to Emeka Egbuka last year where he returned to college instead of going to the NFL. Now Brandon is the 4th receiver on this team, and there's not a lot of room for a 4th receiver on the field when you want to put tight ends in so many different positions. So what did Brandon do? He grabbed the punt return role, by the horns, and has completely wrestled control of that thing, taken ownership of it. He talked about that last week. I thought it was a really cool conversation with him because, he is a former 5-star guy who could demand playing time if he wanted, who could demand all of this attention and things, and could be starting at, 120 programs in the country, 130. I think there's only 5 or 6 that he wouldn't. But that's just not the plan that Ohio State has for him right now with Emeka back. So he's taken that punt return role and really ran with it. I think that's really cool. My first pick with the surprise is going to be I thought he would look good, but I didn't think he would look as good and getting up to game speed in real games. James Peoples looks like the real deal. And I know it's the 2 MAC schools, but like when he's in the game, you notice him. And when Travion and Quinn are in the game, you really do notice those guys. Well, when James goes in the game, it's another running back for Ohio State. It's not like, oh, here comes the freshman. It feels like it's another Ohio State running back. And I think that's a little surprising to me through 2 games. I know running back is probably the easiest position for a freshman to get on the field, if we're being completely honest. But I still think that it's pretty surprising that he's playing at such a high level already in his Ohio State career. Obviously, limited carries. I think he had 6 carries in that Akron game. He had 10 carries for 51 yards and a touchdown in the Western Michigan game. He's got 2 career touchdowns now. Just looks like a player who's going to be a future star for this team.
Yeah, they kept running the ball with him on that final drive with Lincoln Keenholton at quarterback. They probably would have scored another touchdown, and they would have just gone down the field with James Peoples running the ball every play. Like, Lincoln Keenholz didn't attempt to pass, but he was in there that entire drive. And so it doesn't really show up statistically if you're looking at the box score.
Yeah.
But that's just because of how effective at that point and all night, really, against Western Michigan. They actually ran for 273 yards in that game, which is the most they've had since the 2022 season. They never ran for that many yards in 2023. They actually never hit the 250-yard rushing mark. So there's some progress already from the rushing attack that everyone was hoping to see with Chip Kelly and Justin Fry, that marriage being back together from their time at UCLA. But yes, James Peoples is a big part of that. We've heard Chip Kelly say that he doesn't call the game any differently when Quinshon Judkins is in, when Travion Henderson is in, and also when James Peoples is in. Like, all 3 of them kind of go together. And by the way, Sam Williams-Dixon has had a few nice runs in his first couple games as well.
Yeah, I really like this running back room. I mean, I don't have anything bad to say about this running back room right now.
And Mason Maggs is in it.
Yeah, I mean, a walk-on quarterback getting carries in the 4th quarter of a MAC game. You got to feel the excitement there. I was looking up at I was standing next to one of the Ohio State personnel guys, and I was looking up at the Jumbotron instead of watching the game on the field. I was down on the field in the 4th quarter, and I was trying to see a replay of the previous play, and I see 16 get a handoff. I'm like, what? And they show just the back of Mason Maggs' jersey there. And I'm like, what are we doing, guys? But
you know what they were doing? They were playing some copycat with Joe Moorhead and Akron with a 2-quarterback system. That's what that was. It was, hey, we're taking a page out of that playbook and we're using it to put it on tape.
Man, you keep telling yourself that, and I'll let you go ahead and keep telling yourself that. Okay? All right. I like it, though. I mean, that the running back room looks good, and that's why, I guess that's my surprise. I shouldn't be surprised. I think Carlos Loughlin does a pretty good job with those guys, but, still is, it's his first time in the horseshoe, first game action for Carlos Loughlin, too. And I think he's handled it pretty well as the first year running backs coach. Any other surprises before we move on, Andy? I might be out of him. Maybe a couple of players here and there. Feel like we got to talk a little Arvell Reese in this category.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we could certainly go there. Look, I think we all thought he would have a second-year breakout of sorts given the summer he had and how much we heard about him in training camp and saw him in training camp. When he was the scrimmage defensive player of the game, I think that caught everyone's attention that this is going to be a player who is going to have a role this year. The big question was, are there going to be snaps for him to be had? Because it's a 4-2-5 system. Yes, sometimes they play 3 linebackers together, but for the most part, it was going to be Cody Simon and Sonny Styles. With Cody Simon not being there for the first game and being sidelined for that game, then you had Sonny Styles starting at the mic, and then you had CJ Hicks and Arvell Reese playing along with Gabe Powers. And it felt like, aside from Sonny Styles, who was a starter guaranteed, it was Arvell Reese who was the one that emerged next. Of course, CJ Hicks, but aside from that, it was Arvell Reese who was popping. And then that just continued in week 2, where it felt like when they did bring out the 3 linebackers together, it was Cody Simon who was back, Sonny Styles, and then Arvell Reese. And that, I think, told us a lot about where Arvell Reese is at with his development and where they see him factoring in to this linebacker group going forward.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think so. I was talking to people on the Letterman Lounge message board. I don't mean to stutter through this, but there's been some chatter about CJ Hicks moving to defensive end because of how good Arvell Reese looks. But then you have to take a defensive end off the field. And I think Arvell Reese is a capable enough blitzer. We already saw that Cody Simon is, and we know that Sonny Styles is. And this might just be where do you go from here when it comes to CJ Hicks for this year? Because you really, really like what Arvell is doing. And that's not a knock on 11 at all. I think it's more like a hat tip to Arvell. But I think Arvell's been a great surprise this year, and one that Ohio State would love to continue for sure. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen Ohio State run the ball with Will Howard, but also I think they're just saving that so we don't really have to talk about that. I think they're just saving it.
Yeah, I will say that one other surprise is just how well they've done to get all these guys in the game. Like you have more than 80 guys to play against Western Michigan, and that sounds like kind of like, oh, that's not a big deal. Last year they really struggled to build depth early in the season. Yeah, there were some players that stepped up, like Jermaine Matthews, of course, comes to mind first, but for the most part, that was a big talking point in the beginning of last season. It was the new clock rules with the first downs and the clock not stopping and plays just like not being as plentiful as maybe in years past. And I think really what that came down to was just the Ohio State offense not being as efficient and the Ohio State defense being great, but still playing some bend but don't break a little bit in the beginning of the season. And that wasn't showing up necessarily in points given up, but there were some longer drives that maybe you're seeing right now. And I think the first couple of games, for the most part, they've done a really good building that depth and getting guys in, which is huge for team morale. I think, Brian Day has talked about that, but also in a season that's as long as this one is, how many times have we talked about that in the offseason, the importance of getting these guys snaps early and confidence boosts for those guys. And you're actually scoring points. I think that's a big difference too that we talked about. It's not just the backups are in there handing the ball off. I mean, how many times did we see that with Kyle McCord backing up CJ Stroud or, any of the backups really, they just weren't doing a whole lot. You have Julian Sain throwing his first career touchdown pass on his second ever pass attempt.
On a fourth down.
On a fourth and 1.
49-0.
Right. Again, like 3rd and 6, he tries to get the first down with his legs, dives, it's 4th and 1. Maybe in years past, they trot out the punt team and say, hey, we won this game. We'll live to fight another day. No, they're trying to leave no doubt, as they say. And they're also letting these guys play as if it's 0-0. And that's what I think you have to do. So I think that has been a little bit of a surprise of just how well they've done to get all those guys in the game and get actual snaps and reps.
On Three's Ari Wasserman asked Ryan Day about that on Tuesday when that show came out. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. Very good show. Informative. Ryan Day is very relaxed, loose. You want to feel for how Ryan Day is personality-wise this year compared to in years past, go watch that specific interview because it's not an off-season thing where somebody came into town and talked to him. It is a sit-down with somebody who's in the middle of the college football season, and I think it's very informative. Ohio State fans can draw a lot from the way Ryan Day acted in that interview. And Ari asked him, you threw a pass to a true freshman, former 5-star recruit on 4th and 1. That's not something you would do normally. And the answer was pretty telling. So I won't give it away. I'll make Ohio State fans go watch that. It's well worth your time. I think it's like 18 or 19 minutes. So it's not a super long listen, but it's worth watching and not just listening to. So I will give Andy and Ari a plug there, Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman, the way that they talked to Ryan Day. It was a great interview. But that was cool to hear Ryan Day's perspective on getting all these guys actual real reps and not just having them be, handoff, machines in the fourth quarter. Andy, we're only going to do one here because I want a clear answer from you. Who's been the best unit for Ohio State so far through 2 games?
It's got to be a defensive line for me. I think this is arguably the best unit on the entire team. I think the defensive backs would have an argument against that, but they just haven't been challenged enough for me to really know that. At this point, again, when you're playing weaker opponents, typically they try to run the ball, don't test the secondary like Ohio State's as much. But we've seen this defensive line not only be good in pass rush situations. We've seen JT Tuimoloau have a sack and a half in the first game. Jack Sawyer get his first sack in the second game, but have 6 pressures in that game as well. But also Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams, kind of wreaking havoc in the interior like they have been. And we see more of the Rushman package, which flexes the depth of the defensive ends. We've seen even like true freshman Edric Houston make plays, resulting in one of those defensive touchdowns in the opener, batting a pass with his helmet, and then leading to a Gabe Powers touchdown. So I feel like the defensive ends, but really the entire defensive line and run defense as well has been great. So the defensive line for me has been king so far, and that's not surprising at all. And we were previewing this team. The defensive line can stack up to any offensive line in this country. And one thing I will say, we might get to this later, but with Oregon struggling as much as they are right now on the offensive line, They've, by the way, given up 7 sacks so far through 2 games. That's more than they gave up all of last year. I think this Ohio State defensive line's probably licking its chops right now, knowing what's coming on October 12th, unless Oregon gets its stuff together on the offensive line.
Wow. Is that a threat or a promise there, Andy?
They don't look good. I mean, if you
I agree. I agree.
They can't run the ball effectively. They're not protecting Dylan Gabriel, who, by the way, gets the ball out extremely quickly. That's been one of his traits throughout his time at UCF, Oklahoma, and now Oregon. Like, he throws the ball quickly, just as Bo Nix did last year, but it's not working like it did last year, despite returning 3 starters, I believe, on the offensive line.
Yeah, it's not really gelling. And I think Dan Lanning addressed that. We'll talk about that at some point. But, yeah, you're right. The defensive line has been great. I'm going to go safeties. And the reason I'm going to go safeties is because Caleb Downs is so freaking good, man. And Lathan Ransom reminded everybody how good he is, with his performance there in the first game. And he was a little quieter in the second game, but you still feel that presence out there. And then the quote from Jim Knowles, and I'm actually going to read the quote because I think it's important. The safety depth is building. And Jim Knowles said repeatedly in training camp that he was concerned about safety depth. So he was asked on Tuesday about safety depth and if those concerns were easing. And he just said very point blank, yes. And then he went on to say, quote, both of those guys are coming along, and the more reps they get, they've been showing up and doing all the right things, playing hard, making their checks, and making plays when their number's called. So the more reps we can get them, the better. Because like I said, football is a tough game, a long season, and we need them. Ohio State saw firsthand what happens on a phantom targeting call on Saturday. Denzel Burke did not play the final 3 quarters. Now, luckily for Ohio State, and because of how good Tim Walton is at his job, they just threw Jermaine Matthews out there, and he was considered another starter. If that happens to one of these safeties on just because Caleb Downs was also in on that play with Denzel Burke, they could have called it on Caleb Downs. And if that would have happened, you would have had a Malik Hartford or Jalen McClain out there with Lathan Ransom. It's so important for those 2 guys to be ready. Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford. So if they are coming along like Jim Knowles says they are, then I'm going to give them the nod for the best unit because they had more ground to cover to get to be there then. And maybe I'm grading on a curve. Actually, you know what? I am grading on a curve, and it's because it's my grading system. So I'm going to go safeties because I think that they've been performing pretty well considering where they started in the season.
Yeah, I'm actually a bit surprised those 2, Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford, haven't played more. I'm looking at the total stats. They've played 19 snaps each over 2 games.
Yeah.
And Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom have played 96 snaps each, which is most on the team. And so I'm a little bit surprised that, Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford haven't played more and those opportunities to maybe build that depth more. I get wanting to get the chemistry of Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs playing together in real game action, but, maybe you'd like to see a little bit more distribution going towards those underclassmen way. But yeah, still good point. I mean, that I think actually in the press box, we thought that it was Caleb Downs who was going to be potentially removed from the game because of targeting, and ultimately was Denzel Burke. But you're right, they were right both in there on that play, and that would have sprung into action that conversation that you just talked about and that Jim Knowles and the media has been having really throughout the entire offseason.
Caleb Downs recently signed a deal with an apparel company, and I was scrolling on Instagram and saw that. And Matt Parker wrote about it. And Rhoback sent him some gear, Rhoback activewear. You've probably seen me wear this many, many times. Andy has, of course. I've had it for years. So this was not a paid advertisement at all. Rhoback is like my favorite apparel company. It's Rhoback activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback: the best fit, the best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rhoback, they are completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback just released their new licensed game day collection, and it's awesome. Novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools, not just these, which are amazing, but these with some of your favorite school logos on them, Ohio State's logo. It's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else in the market is putting this level of custom design with this quality of activewear. Oh, and Rhoback's everyday active shorts are the perfect pairing as well. Polo and active shorts, they're in. I wear it sometimes. I know you do it sometimes, Andy. They're so comfortable, have an elastic waistband and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short, but the comfort of an athletic short. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with college stars Jalen Milroe, the Alabama quarterback, Quinn Ewers, which we'll talk about in our next segment, and Ohio State safety Caleb Downs, among others. They are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes. Use the code Letterman20. I'm going to put it on the screen. Letterman20 for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of the week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com, Rhoback.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with the code Letterman20 at Rhoback Activewear. And you know what? This week only, I've got a couple of these. Like, look at that, Andy. They've got little Brutus on them, the helmet.
The Buckeye.
I mean.
Flag, yeah. The pennant.
And then look at this. You want just endless horseshoes, the greatest cathedral in college football?
That's really cool.
Yeah, man, these things are awesome. They're so great. I can't wait to get on the golf course with those, cover some games, and I'm like, man, that's going to be so cool. Last superlative we've got here. Best moment. And it's only because I want to talk about a moment, and then maybe you'll have one, but maybe you won't. I don't know.
You start. Go for it.
My best moment, and I'm really excited for this, is my guy. I've been kind of beating the drum for him this offseason. Ohio State needed tight ends to step up, and they had a guy who was suspended all year last year, who's a big body, 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds, can really move people in the run game, and I think he's a capable pass catcher. Well, guess what? That 4th and 1 completion from Julian Sayin that I was just talking about, it went to Bennett Christian after Bennett was doing some dirty work in the run game against Western Michigan. I thought Bennett played really, really well. And for him to be rewarded with a long touchdown catch and run on his first collegiate catch after working on scout team all year last year because he was suspended in kind of a thing that, I don't think he understood what he was doing, but he took full responsibility for it. He worked really hard last year. He had to block JT and Jack all year last year on the end of the line of scrimmage with the scout team. Goes out there in game 2, works his tail off. Keenan Bailey said some really great things about him, and for him to get a 55-yard touchdown in the second game of the year, I don't care what the score was. I thought it was a really cool moment for Bennett, for the tight end room to celebrate with him, and for Ohio State in general for sticking with a guy who made a mistake last year and has kind of bounced back from it.
Yeah, it's a great one. And there's so many actually already. I kind of want to run through a few.
Okay.
The Gabe Powers pick 6 was great. I mean, look, Edric Houston gets his head in there. His head was in the game, and the ball bounces up. It's floating in the air. Gabe Powers, a Marysville native, had family there, of course, and scores the touchdown. That's a really cool moment for someone who's waited his turn, probably could have transferred elsewhere. We've seen other linebackers do so, and has kind of waited to have an opportunity to play at Ohio State. He's getting that opportunity. Still limited action so far, but Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis like what they see from him. That was a really cool moment for him to get that touchdown in the opener. And then I'll also say, hey, that same game, you have Travion Henderson lay down maybe the biggest block of the season so far in pass protection, just a complete pancake, gets the celebration with Jelani Thurman afterwards. And it was on a downfield pass to Carnell Tate that was able to happen because of Travion Henderson's blocking. That one is also in my mind. And then I think, the third one I'll mention is just Will Howard getting his first rushing touchdown. It's been since 2019 when Justin Fields, and it's 2020, I guess, as well, when Justin Fields was starting quarterback. It's the last time the starter quarterback at Ohio State has run for a touchdown. And look, that's a big deal for this offense. They talked so much in this offseason about running the quarterback. And as you mentioned earlier in the show, we haven't seen maybe as much as that as we might see later on in the year. But for Will Howard to have that moment, he always says it's fun to throw a touchdown, but it's even better to run for a touchdown. He gave the OH to the crowd there, and I think that was just a really cool moment there for QB1 this year, Will Howard.
Yeah, it was kind of stunning when he did it, though, because we haven't seen it in so long. It's like, what is that? Is that a quarterback running the football? I don't think that's allowed anymore. And then he gets in the end zone. It's like, oh, yeah, that is allowed because Ohio State just hasn't done it. Whether that's because of depth or somebody couldn't do it, or, the guys who could have done it maybe transferred out, and then the guys who started wouldn't do it. Like you can make your own adventure with that topic in quarterback run. But Ohio State quarterback run is back at Ohio State in a big way, and I think you'll see that expanded as the season goes on, Andy. All right, let's do it. Ohio State, one of the most successful programs in the country, recruits at a top 5 level every single year. You can only have 85, though. So a lot of these guys come in as highly touted recruits, and then they leave and they find other avenues of college football, or, join LinkedIn or, other things. We're going to break down some transfers. There starts the season. Ohio State's not playing this week. There's not really a ton to break down. We've done a lot already. We did the Monday after. We did a video, this morning. It came out this morning on YouTube, where we talked about what the Buckeyes still need to improve on. We talked to Jim Knowles and Ryan Day. There's just not a lot right now. So we're going to talk some transfers, from the obvious ones to the ones that you probably forgot they existed. And so I know the most obvious one that you're all thinking about is former Ohio State center Victor Cutler, who's now at Louisville. No, I'm just kidding. We'll get to Vic. I'm not throwing shade at Vic. That's one of the non-obvious ones. No, let's talk Kyle, man. Like, the most scrutinized guy in Columbus last year, maybe other than Ryan Day and the head of the NIL foundations. He looks great. Great. Former Rhoback athlete too, by the way. Kyle is really comfortable right now, and you can tell. I don't know if I saw him that comfortable in any of his times I ran into him at Ohio State, other than when he was on the sidelines of a camp in June talking to people, just hanging out. He was yelling at his teammates in a good way. He was very animated, spiking the football after a long run to move the chains against Georgia Tech last week. He's part of a 2-0 squad that beat up on my Ohio Bobcats in game 1, beat a ranked Georgia Tech team in week 2, and he is top 5 in the country in passing yards. He looks great, and I'm really happy for Kyle McCord.
Yeah, before I launch in my opinion, I do want to mention for our last segment, we do have to say that Jeremiah Smith definitely deserves moment 1, 2, and 3. I'm already feeling that's coming in the comments, and I just want to say I thought we were of the game or plays of the season so far, but that 70-yard breakaway touchdown that he had is probably moment number 1 for me. But as our colleague Tim May says, I digress, and we'll go to Kyle McCord. So Kyle has been great so far, and I think the big thing is that people forget is he had 2 bum ankles. It wasn't just 1 bum ankle; it was 2 bum ankles last year. It restricted his mobility. He's not a dual threat quarterback. He's not the fastest guy. He is not Will Howard as far as mobility goes and size goes, but he can move around in the pocket, outside of the pocket, better than I think we saw last year. And look, I think it's a credit to him that, he didn't want to talk about that stuff. He didn't want to make excuses for himself. It's a bit of a shame of how things kind of ended for him at Ohio State and the narrative that came out of that. And there's obviously truth in a lot of narratives that come out of things, right? But at the same time, I think he was pretty humble when he was at Ohio State. He gave a lot to the program. It was nice to hear Ryan Day talk about him in a positive light and not kind of dance around the question he was asked this week, asking if he's seen Kyle play at Syracuse. And Ryan, talked about how he's seen highlights of it, and he feels like Kyle's in a good rhythm right now at Syracuse. And I will say, this is nothing against what Ryan Day did in coaching Kyle, because he coaches these quarterbacks hard. He still does that from the CEO role. He did that when he was, the head coach and still having a hand in the offense as the play caller. And he, of course, did that as offense coordinator and quarterbacks coach. But also, it definitely helps to have a coach like Fran Brown at Syracuse who's just really just promoting Kyle all the time. And I think it's just different philosophies that you take. It's also a different program. The expectations are different at Syracuse than they are at Ohio State. And we're just kind of seeing Kyle flourish in his second year as a full-time starting quarterback. So it's been cool to see. I think both parties won. Both things can be true. Kyle McCord, this change was good for him, and he's doing really well at Syracuse. But also Will Howard's doing great at Ohio State as well, and that was, looks to be an upgrade for this offense.
Maybe they'll become friends at the combine. That's what I hope.
Yeah.
That's what I hope.
It's possible.
I think it would be a lot of fun. Let's talk Quinn now. I mean, guy torched Michigan after at SEC Media Days calling him the team up north, and then went to Michigan and beat the brakes off of Michigan. That's got to feel good for a guy who was on the 2021 travel roster when Ohio State went up there and lost for the first time in, almost a decade in the snow. He was on that travel roster. He was 0-1 in that building. Now he's 1-1, and he's got the Longhorns rolling. We don't really have to talk too much about Quinn. Like, he was here for like 5 months, kind of a, that is what it is. We don't need to get into that part of it, but like, he is a former Buckeye, and he just, again, beat Michigan pretty badly.
Well, hey, maybe if they were coaching the games like they are this year with throwing on 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter, he would have made some highlight reel passes late when instead of just handing the ball off when he did get his few snaps at Ohio State. So
hey, real quick, he's the only starting quarterback to win in the Big House without having his black stripe removed. Think about that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he never got that removed. But yeah, it wasn't just him that played well though. Texas just dominated Michigan. The Texas offensive line, I think, was the most impressive in that game, given the NFL talent that's still there on the Michigan defensive line. And that Michigan defense is good. There's no question about that. But the offense just couldn't compete against Texas's defense, or the offense really has struggled overall. But yeah, Quinn Ewers, you got to give him his flowers, right? Last year was impressive as well, being really a play away from a national title game appearance. And who knows how that game goes against Michigan then. Now they get the opportunity to play them in 2024, and they made the most of it, definitely beating them down 31-12. So yeah, Quinn Ewers, and Ryan Day mentioned him as well. So, it's not just us talking about him.
Yeah. Ryan Day actually, again, in that interview with Andy and Ari, also said that he likes to think that Quinn learned a lot when he was here for that year. And I think Quinn will probably, in hindsight, tell you he did. So, I don't think Ohio State will claim him quite like they claim Joe Burrow, because Joe spent 3 years here and has a degree from Ohio State. Whereas Quinn just got a kombucha deal and then kind of split town. But, I still think that Quinn would probably tell you now that he's matured quite a bit, that he learned a lot when he was at Ohio State. And so, I hope that at some point, maybe in the green room or something at some point, Ryan Day and Quinn get to talk a little bit. That'd be cool, I think. All right. There's so many transfers, but like, there are some of them who are not having as big of an impact. Like, Julian Fleming has 1 catch at Penn State through 2 weeks. He didn't have a target against West Virginia. Last week he had one catch against Bowling Green. Caleb Burton at Auburn had a long catch in the opener. I don't think had any production in the Cal game. Keon Grays he has not played much at Cal so far this season. Caleb Brown, that 2022 receiver class, I'm just kind of going through now. Kojo Answe being the last one standing at Ohio State from that. Caleb Brown is at Iowa, hasn't done a whole lot. But then there's one guy who's starting and making a ridiculously big impact for a 2-0 team. That is Jesse Mirco. Yes, former Ohio State punter Jesse Mirco. 6 punts, 49.7 yard average. Crazy. He is booting the football, Andy. And like, we don't do a lot of actually, we do. Compared to others, we do a lot of special teams. Yeah, but Jesse Mirco, almost 50-yard average punts. I think he's worth mentioning as we go through the list of former Buckeyes who are around the country.
Yeah, definitely worth mentioning. Also, shout out Pro Kick Australia, because that's where Joe McGuire came from as well, who's been pretty solid so far as Ohio State's starting punter. Hat tip to him for winning that job in the last minute in training camp, or not even training camp. Training camp was over the week leading up to week 1. So that's just the way things go. But yeah, Jesse Mirco, shout out. I look, he was kind of the hero of the Cotton Bowl. He probably played his best game last season in the Cotton Bowl and helped Ohio State stay in that game, along with great defensive play the first 3 quarters of that game. Just the offense couldn't do anything. But yeah, glad he's doing well at Vanderbilt. A lot of these guys, though, it is a bit surprising that some are not making the impact that you would think going to other places. It's funny, like Keon Grays, Caleb Burton, I guess they were on other sides of the field, Auburn, Cal, right? But not really making much of an impact in that game.
I will say, this is not a Cal program, but the Bears have got a decent receiver room. Keon's kind of fighting for playing time there. They got some guys there that I like, that I remember from like recruiting when I used to do some recruiting stuff, whether it would be with Matt or when I was doing recruiting stuff with Berm, like, some names there that's like, oh, that guy's at Cal. Really? Okay. So Keon, kind of fine for playing time. You know what I'm fighting for? I'm fighting for the Wendy's saucy nugs every day, Andy. I can't keep my hands off of them because you've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and they turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm. The real heat seekers in the family go spicy ghost pepper. Only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you to try them because they'll light you up. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's gotta be Wendy's. At participating U.S. Wendy's, of course. Let's talk Joe Royer, man. Like, probably could be helping the Ohio State tight end room, maybe. Change of scenery has been pretty good for him. He looks good at Cincinnati. He looks like he's comfortable there back home. Another guy that you're really happy for because some of the stuff that he had to go through with injuries and personal tragedy, like you see that guy doing well.
Yeah, he has more receiving yards right now than Carnell Tate. We're talking about them before the show. He's got 8 catches right now, $130, over $130 receiving yards, and had a touchdown as well. So that's always really cool to see, especially the tight ends where at Ohio State, it's hard to stand out. The Kate Stover numbers are going to be few and far between. Like, I think it's going to be certain years. You have to be quite a standout at that position to command that kind of target share. And Kate Stover did it. I don't know if anyone's going to do that this year. Probably not. But you get other opportunities elsewhere if you do choose that. And look, Joe Royer was with the program for 4 years. It's another guy that gave his time to the program. Actually played quite a bit in that Peach Bowl game against Georgia because Kate Stover went out really quickly in that game.
Yeah.
And, it's cool to see other guys like Brian Day was saying, like you're saying, like it's cool to see other Ohio State players getting a chance to actually make an impact and having some success too. Evan Pryor, also at Cincinnati, scored a touchdown early in the season. So also a guy who dealt with injury trouble. That's neat to see as well.
Last one on the offensive side, I think Noah Rogers at North Carolina State, having a decent start to his year. Second-year player, first year in a new place, I guess. Familiar territory, though, because he's back at home, where he probably, if we're being all honest with each other, probably should have went. There was a lot of interest there in the middle of that recruitment. Good for Noah. And then Chip Trainum, he's been hurt all year at Kentucky. I think he broke his wrist or his collarbone. He's out like 6 to 8 weeks, so his impact won't be known for the Wildcats until it might be too late because they don't look like they're very good. So, that's on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, like, we can just rattle off some of these names, and you're almost just playing like name a guy, with some of these. I will say Reed Carrico playing really well at West Virginia. Only has, it says, 1 hurry. It says he's got 6 tackles, but he's almost averaging a defensive grade of 80 plus on PFF. He's played 47 snaps across 2 games. Played 25 in the in the loss to Penn State, played 22 against Albany, but I think they were just winning by a lot, so he didn't play that much. He's not starting, but he's firmly in the rotation there. And I think that's good for him. An Ohio guy who wanted to be a Buckeye, who gave it a really good try, and it didn't work out, and that's okay. But I think that is another cool one. Jaden McKenzie is at East Carolina playing good minutes, not starting, but playing a lot. Jacob James, I forgot to mention him in the offense. He's starting as the center at Toledo. They could beat Mississippi State this week. So there's a lot of these like veteran guys who you remember, and you remember when they picked Ohio State, and you were so excited when they picked Ohio State. And now it's like, well, they're doing things at other schools, and we just kind of forget about them. Like, I know Ryan Turner and Cam Martinez haven't had an impact there yet because I think Cam is hurt, but like Boston College, it's a pretty good team. And they're going to go on the road to Missouri, and, maybe one of those guys makes a big play, and you say, oh, my gosh, I remember when that guy committed to Ohio State, and I was so excited. Now I'm watching him on Ohio State's off week, make the winning play at Missouri in an SEC environment.
Yeah, and BC, as impressive as they've been, they do have some depth issues on defense. So both those guys at some point this season could make an impact. And also, we didn't mention Dallin Hayden, who, of course, transferred to Colorado during the spring window. Unfortunately, hasn't had the most success so far just because that offensive line is still pretty weak for Colorado, and that's, of course, having an effect on their passing game with Shooter Sanders, but also their rushing attack, which wasn't great last year, and unfortunately for Dalvin, Hayden has not been great so far this year. But he is their lead back at Colorado, so he's getting those RB1 carries, unlike he would this year with Quinn Jenkins and Travion Henderson being
but RB1 carries in Colorado's offense is pretty relative.
Right. Yeah. It's like 10 carries a game,
Yeah, they're kind of running the air raid over there. I don't know. Anyone else stick out to you that is a former Sam Hart, also on the Colorado roster, played, I think, 2 snaps so far this season on offense. Again, that's not Sam's fault. I don't blame Sam. Colorado's inability to figure out what a tight end does on the field, not Sam's fault. Colorado's inability to use a running back, not really Dallin's fault. Although it is, I guess, their fault that they picked that place. But Sam went back home, and Dallin picked a place where he thought he was going to do well. I did have somebody tell me that they thought that Dallin could have helped Ohio State this year on a potential national championship team. But when you want to be a lead back, you want to be a lead back. Completely understand the decision. And this segment is not to question anyone's decisions.
Yeah. Also changing position coach, too.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. It's just interesting that I think Carlos Loughlin, he had a pretty good relationship from their time.
Yeah, right.
And then he transferred away anyway. Last one, because this is probably the highest ranked guy other than Julian Fleming that's on the list. Well, Julian and Kyle, I guess. Former Ohio State defensive end Omari Abor, 3 snaps against Houston Christian, no snaps in the loss to BYU. I don't know what's going on there. Guy was supremely talented, not really getting on the field at SMU. I don't know. It'll be a head scratcher for me for a long time because I thought he was a really good player, and it just didn't quite work out. So, I do like doing that, Andy. I know that Ohio State fans, some of them say like, "Well, I don't care about that guy. He's not there anymore." But like, it's a pretty impressive roster of guys who just left. And like Enoch Vimahi, another guy we just completely forgot to mention, starting at Washington right now. In a Big Ten program, he's starting and he's thriving. He's had really good PFF grades. It's hard to measure offensive line success, but so far in the stuff that I've seen from Washington, he looks pretty good. It's like just another guy who could not find the field at Ohio State for anything, and then now is starting at Washington. It looks pretty good.
Well, yeah, I mean, he got the opportunity in the Cotton Bowl, and it just didn't go well at all. So, what a way to bounce back, getting a starting opportunity at Washington, which, by the way, might not be as bad as people expected. I think when they lost all the talent that they did after last year's national runner-up finish, people were like, okay, they're going to be gutted, especially once you lose Kalen DeBoer. But Jed Fish has done a pretty good job, I think, with Will Rogers as quarterback from Mississippi State. Like they've looked okay the first couple of weeks, and maybe they'll be an okay team in the Big Ten this year. I'm not saying they're going to contend to win it, but I don't know if they're going to be, in the back half of the conference either.
Andy, we're in transition here. We're going to wrap the show up. We got less than an hour till the NFL kicks off, which, you can be excited for that if you'd like. This is a pregame show. That's why we do it from 6:30 to 7:30 on Thursdays. You get home, you have dinner, and then you watch Lettermen Live presented by Wendy's. I don't know if there's a better thing to do with your Thursday night. I can't think of one. And I've got things to do, but this is like my favorite day of the week. Bills Dolphins, who you got?
Oh, I just watched the Bills beat my Cardinals last week, so I'm going Bills. Their offense is interesting this year just because Josh Allen doesn't have like that true wide receiver one. It actually might be better for them because he just has to spread the ball around and there's no one to key in on. He looked pretty good week 1, so I'm going Bills.
No Stephon Diggs to yell at you on the sidelines either, which is always a plus. Now CJ has to deal with that, which he already had to in week 1. Stephon get a little mad, but divas, man, they're everywhere. I'll go Dolphins. I don't know, man. They're fast. Whoever you put a running back in Miami too is going to have like 1 billion yards. I don't care if all the running backs are out. I think it's Jeff Wilson's going to carry the ball for them. He sounds like my accountant. But he's going to run the ball for them and probably have like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I'll go Dolphins. That's not betting advice, though, because that's a pure vibes play. All right. This is how we're going to actually end the show. The slate, like we talked about, is tough. It is. If there's a week, Ohio State's second off week is Georgia, Texas. Yeah. So a stress-free Ohio State Saturday. No worrying about Ohio State. And you also get to dig in and watch Georgia, Texas. I think this is the punishment, and then for what we have to endure this Saturday, we get the reward of Georgia, Texas when Ohio State doesn't have a game the second off week. I think that's how the karmic things are working for us. But we'll talk about the slate anyway. Civil War, Oregon State is this weekend, and you wanted this game on the schedule because you're intrigued about Oregon. Tell me why.
Yeah, intrigued maybe in the wrong ways. I think everyone thought this was the trendy pick to contend with Ohio State for the Big Ten. And right now, you could argue that they're outside of the top 4 most impressive teams in the Big Ten so far. Like, you could say that Nebraska is maybe in that 4th spot, behind USC. I would still put Penn State, even though after last week's struggles, the offense does look better. And then Ohio State, of course, at number 1. Look, Oregon needs to be better in pretty much every way. The line of scrimmage has been an issue for them, both on the defensive line, but also especially on the offensive line. Talked about it earlier. Not only are they not doing a good job protecting Dylan Gabriel, but they're not running the football well at all. They were under 3 yards per carry in week 1. They were just over 3 yards per carry in week 2. So they needed the big plays. They needed 2 special teams touchdowns, one of which they almost dropped a return for a touchdown before they got to the end zone. So long story short, there's problems in Eugene right now. They got to go to Corvallis to play at Oregon State. I think Oregon's going to win, but there's a lot of cracks in this team that I don't think we expected.
Well, it's a lot more transfer heavy than people might realize because they made so much noise in the offseason that you just expect them to be good. But it is hard to get transfers to play well together. And I know that doesn't really talk about the offensive line because I think they returned 3 starters in the offensive line, like you said. But the whole team has to gel together. And I think you're seeing that. It's a little tough. I will say Oregon State lost everything from last year, including all of the coaching staff and the quarterback and the running back. If Damian Martinez was still on this roster, I would straight up just pick Oregon State to win this game because I don't think Oregon stops the run well enough. But he plays at Miami now, so I think Oregon's going to win, but I do think it's going to be a good test. And also, my college football bucket list and your college football bucket list, the fans, probably not the same. Everybody has Death Valley. I have Death Valley on mine too. Everybody has the swamp. It would be fine. Research Stadium in Corvallis, I don't know why. Every time I watch a game, I'm like, I got to go there. It's on my bucket list. That place is going to be rocking on Saturday. Crazy. And I'm very excited to see what the people in Corvallis put on for us. And I will be tuned in with a laser focus on that game because I think it's super intriguing. And if Oregon State, listen, hear me out. If Oregon State knocks off Oregon after Oregon left them for literal dead, it will be the most hilarious outcome in the history of the sport. Hilarious.
If you're an Ohio State fan, though, you're kind of rooting for Oregon to be undefeated
yes.
when October 12th goes around because that just is better for the resume for Ohio State if you're trying to hop Texas, Georgia, So.
And if you're an Ohio State fan spending all that money to go to Eugene, you want to see 2 Titans clash.
Right. Top 5 matchup, top 10 at least, something like that.
Oh, yeah. All right. Let's move on. Alabama's coming north, y'all. What else do we have to say? Alabama at Wisconsin. You wish this game was 53 degrees with a 15-mile-an-hour wind and cheese curds flying through the air. But it's going to be 84 degrees with no wind, and it's going to be a beautiful day. And, oh, by the way, they stuck this sucker at noon, 11 Central. They won't even let the Wisconsin fans get all liquored up like they should have. There's no reason that this game should be. I know the TV contracts are what they are. I don't even fight them for Ohio State games. But this game in particular, Madison, if this game was at 8, Madison would be off the charts. I still think it's going to be crazy, but I just wish that this one was at night, man. It would be so fun.
It's always time to jump around, right? I think they'll be ready for it. I don't know if it's gonna be close at all, but look, Alabama's had its kind of hiccups early in the season. It feels similar to what happened last year. Not quite the same, but I think everyone's just waiting for that offense to kind of hit its stride, and maybe that's going to happen this week. I think we're all still waiting to see if the Phil Longo offense is going to ever work at Wisconsin truly, and just it's always been kind of a weird identity fit for Luke Fickell, in my opinion, having the air raid system, but we haven't seen it click through 13, 14, 15 games so far of his tenure, and he needs it to click badly against Alabama to keep pace with the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, though. I think Alabama's going to win this game. Okay, 2 more. Actually, 3 more. Real quick, Washington State's going to beat Washington. And it won't be as funny because I think the two teams are more evenly matched than Oregon State. But Washington State's going to beat Washington. I'm just saying that. And if I'm right, I'll come on here and gloat. And if I'm wrong, I won't bring it up. But I think Washington State's going to beat Washington. They're good, man. And I don't think Washington's very good. But they're good for like a Mountain West. They're good for what they are, I guess. A Pac-2 Mountain West opponent. Like, it's a good team. And I think it's not in Husky Stadium. It's at the big NFL stadium that always creates the earthquakes in Seattle. Washington State fans will travel too. So, like, I'm excited to see that one too. Then we'll go to the game that you put on here because you are just a sick individual. You want to talk Iowa-Troy, and I'm going to let you have it. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, you know what? Iowa is the second Big Ten team that Ohio State plays. And, of course, we're looking at this through an Ohio State lens. And, look, that could be the test before the test. Maybe it's a bigger test than Oregon. Who knows? I mean, look, Iowa did not finish at all against Iowa State. And that was an ugly loss to an Iowa State team that took its place in the AP Top 25 this week at number 21. Iowa needs to bounce back. There's still a lot of questions about Tim Lester's offense. Cade McNamara did not look good at all against Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk game. I think, listening to Kirk Ferentz this week, because I did that, he was mentioning how in 2002 they had a similar team that was very veteran-laden that also ran the ball really well in the rivalry game against Iowa State, but blew a lead and lost that game, and then they bounced back and won 9 in a row. With a favorable schedule, Iowa wants to do the same thing this time around. They won't probably do that because they play Ohio State, but I do think it's worth watching against Troy if this offense can get back on track because it needs to carry its weight. Like, this Iowa defense is still really good, and I do think we're going to learn a lot about the Ohio State offense when they play Iowa with that matchup. But I'm still curious to see if the Iowa offense can do anything, and I think that's what I'll be watching for the little bit that I watch Iowa-Troy.
Here's a little inside baseball for you guys. Andy's going to be at my house on Saturday watching some college football. He's going to have to stream this sucker on his phone. I'm just letting you know. No, I mean, Troy's bad, man. New coach, Jared Parker, Notre Dame kind of casted him off. He went and got a head coaching job at Troy. They lost 28-26 to Nevada. They lose 38-17 at Memphis in the Liberty Bowl. We'll see. But, yeah, I do want to learn something about Iowa's offense, but it's probably more of like me watching the box score. To just see, like, did Cade McNamara throw for 60% and 2 touchdowns? Okay, then he probably played well. But, we'll have it on. We'll watch a little bit of it, I promise. And then the last game that everybody's going to be dialed into because everyone wants to throw dirt on them already is Michigan. Michigan plays Arkansas State. A plucky Arkansas State team. I don't think they'll give Michigan much trouble because I don't think they can block Michigan at all. But Michigan looked pretty blockable last week for Texas, and that offense is going to keep just anybody that it wants to keep in a game because if that offense is not clicking, anybody can compete with them. It's kind of like, I don't want to call them Iowa, but I did tweet last week, why is Iowa wearing blue? Because that's what it looked like at times. It did. It looked very reductive. It looked very non-creative. They ran their longest play came on a flea flicker, but Michigan's been running a flea flicker once a game for the last 7 years. So it doesn't really surprise you. It just looked a little Iowa-ish, and Iowa is known for losing to teams it shouldn't lose to because the offense doesn't score enough to create separation, and then all of a sudden something crazy happens in the fourth quarter, and then you're in a ball game. So, yeah, Michigan, Arkansas State, it has my attention only because I want to see if Michigan can actually handle an opponent and play big boy football on its offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think the thing with Michigan is it needs its offensive line to hit its stride, and it's similar, not the same at all, but similar with the Ohio State conversation last year with the offensive line, and you're kind of just waiting. It's a new group, placing all the starters up front, which is just another task entirely. Ohio State at least brought back a couple guys before the 2023 season, but that's a hard thing to do. That takes time. It hasn't clicked yet, but if they do click it eventually, I think that running game could still be pretty good, and that they're going to need that to be their bread and butter. And they don't need to run it 32 times in a row like they did against Penn State, but they need to run heavily because they just clearly do not have it at the quarterback position. Davis Warren and Alex Orji can do what they can, but it's very predictable when Orji comes in on third downs or whatever. He's probably running the football. And Davis Warren has just not been effective downfield. So they need that running game to be good, and they need that offensive line to just get better and start gelling fast.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that they'll have any issues with Arkansas State, but who knows? Like I said, with an offense like that, you better play a good defensive game. And like they played well defensively against Fresno, but like if you watch the game, Will Johnson had that long pick 6, but didn't look that great otherwise. And then Texas just didn't throw at him because they didn't have to, because they were picking on Jair Hill the whole game. So like I'm intrigued. I want to see, I don't think Arkansas State has the juice, but maybe they do. And then we're having a whole different conversation because next week USC comes to town. So if you don't look good against Arkansas State, even if you win, if your offense still doesn't look good, then USC all of a sudden is like a team full of thumpers. And Danton Lynn's going to have a good time drawing up his defenses, which looks pretty sound all of a sudden. If nothing else, they're pretty sound. And he'll have a good time drawing up a defensive game plan to stop Michigan. So I think Michigan's got to show something this week on offense.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll just say on this point with Michigan is that, like, to put in perspective, like they still have the 3-game win streak over Ohio State going into the matchup this year. There's even more pressure in my eyes on Ohio State, if it's even possible, to beat Michigan now and maybe beat Michigan badly because of the way Michigan's looked so far. And if they're trending towards like a 7-5, 8-4 season, Ryan Day and Ohio State has to win and maybe, to really satisfy fans, has to win by multiple scores against this Michigan team that looks quite vulnerable right now.
Yeah, the other game that I have to just tell you about real quick, and then I'm going to get us out of here, is Friday night. There's only 2 ranked matchups, ranked unranked. One of them is Andy Backstrom's Boston College Golden Eagles, or is it just the Eagles? Just the Eagles. I always get it confused. I'm serious. I always have all this. All right, Boston College Eagles against the Missouri Tigers. The other one is on Friday night, Arizona at Kansas State. Teteroa McMillan, phenomenal. Kansas State can run the ball. Can they throw it? I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah. It's gonna be a really fun game to watch, though. It's gonna be really fun to watch, and I'm really excited for it. I'm also excited to have the week off, even though we haven't really taken any time off. Andy Backstrom, the hardest working man in show business, and me, Spencer Holbrook. We don't really take much time off. We will be watching football on Saturday. I'll be chatting about it in the Letterman Lounge. Come hang out with us there. We'll talk college football all day on Saturday. We talk Ohio State football every day there. Come hang out. Get a membership to LettermenRow.com. Andy on the other side of your screen. Spencer Holbrook right here. It is Letterman Live. It is presented by Wendy's. Thanks for joining us, as always, every Thursday. Come back next Thursday. Bring your friends. Tell your family members. Steal your family members' phones. Put it on Letterman Live. So then hand it back to them. So then they have to watch it with us on the YouTube channel. Don't really do that. That's probably theft. But it would be great if more people watch this video, because we love having, questions and comments and concerns. Like the video below to make a real impact on this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Come to LettermenRow.com. Come hang out with us. Get a membership to LettermenRow.com. We'll see you guys over there. We'll see you on Saturday on the Letterman Lounge message board as the college football slate continues to turn in Ohio State.